I can't remember his name now, but he wrote a book called The Failing Logic of Money, which was quite interesting, and he suggested that we didn't need money.
I would agree, but if you went from where we are now to a situation where we have no money, as such, it's too big a leap. It is too big a leap. And I'm not decrying any of these theories out there because they do follow through. It is possible not to have any currency at all, or any money at all. But at the end of the day, we are up to our necks in the current system, which is collapsing around us rapidly, and what we've had so far is nothing.
Well, we'll talk about the collapse, because it is cyclical, isn't it? But here's a good question. I don't know who's sending this. Where does this leave Scots money?
Well, there's... yeah.
Especially as the Scottish banks aren't independent anymore, are they?
The Scottish banks, actually, for a long time, have been able to print their own money.
But it was still issued as debt.
Yeah, it was still issued as debt. And there have been changes recently to that.
Well, both the Scottish banks were subsumed into other banks, weren't they?
They're all nationalised. I mean, what's happening as these individual banks collapse is, obviously, their values drop. That's the first thing that happens. Their share values drop, the bank collapses, and somebody buys the bank at the reduced value. The very process of making the share values drop is the process by which the elite at the top can buy them up for pennies. Pennies in the pound, literally. So they're all merging into one bank.
But how did it work before? I think this is a really interesting question, because how did privately owned banks in Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland and the Bank of Scotland, both issued, and I think Clydesdale Bank as well, 3 banks, didn't they?
Yeah.
Issued currency. So how was that allowed, privately owned banks? Was everybody knew that they were issuing currency?
Yeah, you move, but they didn't actually issue it. It was still issued as if it were sterling. They had the power to do what we're talking about.
You had banknotes with those 3 banks printed on them, didn't you?
Yeah, they had the power to do what we're talking about. They didn't have the balls to do it. Because, you know, the consequences of any bank or any nation state issuing its own currency, not as a debt, are very, very severe. In fact, there is a classic example, as I'm sure you're aware in history. I think it was $50 billion was printed by JFK. Soon he gave a speech saying he was going to get rid of these people. He gave a good speech about how they'd infiltrated all aspects of society. They controlled it through the economic system. There was nothing democratic about them at all. And they enslaved Americans. And so he was going to print, and did actually print, the run of 50 billion, I think it was, but someone might correct me on that. And what happened? 2 weeks later, he's dead. And of course, the money was never issued. So that's what's happening.
OK, I still want to get, just to get clear in my mind about these Scottish banks. So they were issuing money. What, did they have some sort of authority to issue it from the Bank of England then?
No, I think the authority stemmed originally from when Scotland was not part of the UK. I'd have to admit, it's not something that I'm all that familiar with. I don't know the entire history of it. I do know that the Scottish banks have been issuing their own currency, but it is linked, it is effectively sterling. It has no different value. And it's still issued as a debt.
But one is now part of HSBC. One is part of Lloyd's TSB, I believe.
Yes.
Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
And who owns the other one? Is Clydesdale Bank still independent?
That's the only one I queried earlier. Perhaps someone can enlighten us on that.
OK, well, anybody out there knows, please let us know. If you're in Scotland, and you know.
But at the end of the day, it's all detail which is ultimately irrelevant. And, you know, you can discuss these details for ages. The point is, currency is issued as a debt, and it doesn't have to be.
OK, Brian in South Wales is saying credit default swaps, trillions of unregulated dollars, the elephant in the room. Is that right? Credit default swaps?
Credit defaults. Well, there now follows a list of 167 different items which will confuse the reader, starting with credit default swaps, moving into, well, let's not even go there, because what they are is bankers and city traders actually trading on things that they create. I mean, it was realised, for example, that insurance can be packaged together and sold on.
I think AIG got into trouble.
That's right, and thereby decreasing the risk to the insurer, whilst at the same time increasing the risk to you and I, because it's going to go pop.
But they've been saved by the American government, haven't they? And thus, I think they're still sponsoring Manchester United. I could be wrong.
It's amazing. You say they've been saved by the American government. Yeah, they should have been allowed to go under. Coming back to the credit crunch in this country, which is, it's all the same thing, Gordon Brown stood on television and lies through his teeth about what's actually going on. And I do mean that. You can pursue me for calling him a liar if he wants to.
I have to say then that Mark Cockingham's opinions are not necessarily the opinions of this station.
Yeah. It's, come on, Gordon, do it. If he wants to do it, do it. It could be fun. But he will tell you one thing and do another. Now, the solution to the credit crunch, at a very real and practical level, we're forgetting all the other aspects, was this. Imagine you had a mortgage for 100,000 on a property worth 150.
Okay.
That property value in the crisis dropped to 80,000, say.
Okay.
You still have 100,000 debt. They should have reduced your mortgage debt down to 80. And they should have done that with everybody.
So with all those trillions of pounds they paid to the banks, they should have instead paid off part of everybody's debt.
Yeah.
Everybody's individual
And
debt.
that's the solution to the credit crunch. And it would actually have taken, and I may be wrong because the figures are very loose here, but something like 15 to 18% of the actual amount that they paid to the bankers to bail everyone out. So when that was one choice, he chose the other. And I'd love him to sit here and tell us why. Do you know what? He can't.
No, I've got to read this one out. This is from Richard D. Hall from richplanet.net, who, as you know, makes a programme on this channel. And he says, do you think the Rothschilds, I think the question's for you, Mark, actually. Do you think the Rothschilds are controlled by extraterrestrials? Great show, Theo.
I don't know.
Thank you, Richard.
Do you, Richard? Haven't a clue. I mean, of course, there's all these stories about who actually sits at the top of this and whether they're extraterrestrial, whether they're not. The ironic thing is, if you research into this, and the closer you do get to the top, it's not as incredible as it may sound, and it gets a bit scary. But it's irrelevant who controls it.
Okay.
Because whoever and whatever is up there controlling this, they are anchored to our society through the issuance of the currency. It's their umbilical cord. We, the people in this country, can cut that, and we can cut it tomorrow.
Well, it would take a... Well, OK, first of all, let me ask you a question. Carol texted in and said, how bad is it going to get?
Well, it's going to get pretty bad, I guess. But no one likes a prophet of doom, and I'm not doing prophet of doom stuff. There's plenty of people out there saying the same thing.
Are you the debit of doom?
The debit of doom. How bad it's going to get is this. Because of what's happened, they've put so much money into the system. Remember the pot we were talking about earlier? They've ploughed so much money in that effectively the value of the money in that pot has to decrease proportionately. So at some point, and the same applies to the dollar, they have to devalue the sterling and the dollar.
And presumably all the other currencies.
And all the other currencies that are affected by this,
and...
yeah. I like to sort of focus on ours, but the same applies everywhere else.
Okay.
So there will be either a devaluation or a hyperinflation. Now, it's a mathematical certainty. Again, if there's an economist out there who can say I'm wrong, come on and show us, and I'll humbly say, well, I'd missed that. Maybe you're right. But you know what? They won't do it, because they can't. The second they stop pumping money into the system, it will hyperinflate. And that is why 2 weeks ago they put another 500 billion into the system, and they will decide at some point they're not going to put any more in. Well, strap your seatbelt on at that point.
So you're saying that this is like the second part of the dip, are you? You're saying it's a double dip and that it's all deliberate. The recession is a double dip and it's
hard to say it's deliberate. There were so many bankers caught up in it all that they were just playing the game, making money for themselves. But yes, anyone who understands the system knows that it is ultimately destined to collapse, and therefore you could accuse them of having done this deliberately.
Well, because they are cyclical, aren't they? It is always boom and bust. And well, I mean, I remember Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor saying that he'd put an end to boom and bust.
Gordon Brown said something he didn't do. I don't believe that. Don't be daft.
Well, I'm fairly certain he said that.
Are you suggesting Gordon Brown lies?
Oh,
I don't know.
I couldn't possibly suggest that.
No.
I think perhaps he was mistaken.
No, neither could I, but it would be very interesting, again, if Gordon were sat here, and I'd love to hear his... it's not after 9 o'clock yet, is it?
No, we can't use any swear words yet, I'm afraid.
I'd love to hear his answers, but...
Mark in Nottingham has said, is this why Gordon Brown sold all our gold?
Yes, Mark in Nottingham.
Yes, there you go, Mark. There's your answer.
The question is who bought all the gold. That's a fun one to try and track down.
Well, yes, I've read on the internet, who knows if it's true, that Fort Knox is empty.
Yeah.
That there is no gold there, and that some American senators wanted to see it and were told that they couldn't.
That's it. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine our MPs in the House of Commons saying, well, can we go to the vault at the Bank of England and just check that that money is there and you haven't actually nicked it?
Well, it's all been sold, hasn't it?
Yeah. And Gordon Brown said, oh, no, you can't do that. Well, why not? Whose money is it, and what right have these people got to do this?
And he sold it at the bottom of the market, didn't he?
Yeah, they collapsed it deliberately, so whoever was going to buy it could buy it at pennies in the pound again. It's the biggest scam in human history, and it has to stop, and we can stop it.
In fact, well, Denise in Cambridgeshire has said, does the Bank of England have any gold to back up the fiat money?
Go in and ask them, Denise.
There you go, Denise. If you're passing the Bank of England, I believe it's in Threadneedle Street in the City of London, and we'll talk about the City of London later, believe me.
See, I have to throw in at this point, this is what it's about. It's not about people like me sat here getting irate about it. It's about people like Denise and others who are texting in who have their questions. Go and ask the Bank of England or the government. Well, let them know that you know.
All right, well, Dean in Brighton says, what is the shareholders' goal? And I imagine he means the shareholders of the Bank of England. What is their goal? You know what that might be?
Well, I bet it isn't to make losses. I bet it's to get and to maintain and sustain their wealth. As to beyond that, many other things could be speculated upon, but they get rich and they control your government. They control every aspect of the economy as a result of the money that they're taking out of your pocket. And they even had the audacity recently not just to take it out of your pocket, but your children's and your grandchildren's and their children, because that's how much debt the UK is in now as a result of all this money that Gordon's paying to bankers for all their good work.
Yeah, I think I printed something out about that debt. Let me see if I can find that quickly.
This is a crime that's taking place. These people are criminals.
Yeah, this is interesting. Warren Buffett, who's one of the wealthiest men on earth, he says in the New York Times, Congress is now spending 185% of what it takes in. Our deficit is a post-World War II record of 13% of GDP. This is in America, obviously. Our debt is growing by 1% a month, and we are borrowing $1.8 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. So, there you go. Even Warren Buffett apparently is scared by what's happening.
Of course. And at the end of the day, there could be a million different questions asked and a million different facts researched and written down. But what's happening... Well, sorry, the bare fact here is we are in so much debt and have deliberately been put into that debt that when someone asks me, is it going to get worse? It's like, well, if you can explain how it's going to get better... do, because it can't. We're in so much debt, there is no way out of this. And they know it. And they are planning for this, and this is where it moves into your New World Order type scenario, because they know the people are less than pleased with what's happening.
YB in Gloucestershire says, or Gloucester, would Mark tell us what the second reason is for them buying the gold? Was there a second reason that perhaps you didn't get to? Maybe I cut you off there?
Well, it's always intrigued me. Anyone who's aware of this stuff called monatomic gold.
Ah, monatomic gold.
That this monatomic gold can be processed out of gold.
Is it the white powder gold?
The white powder of gold. It's a high-spin resonant state of gold.
This is getting into weird esoteric stuff here now, isn't it?
It's weird esoteric, but peer-reviewed science as well. So it's a question of perspective on it. And literally, that is, monatomic gold basically is where the electrons around the atom, the atom's field of energy encompasses all the electrons, so the electrons can't bond together, so the gold falls apart into a powder.
It just means one atom, doesn't it? Monatomic.
Yeah, basically.
So
but they can't bind. Yeah, it's the electrons that bind atoms together. And once they're encompassed by the energy from the nucleus, they can't bind, so they fall apart.
Do they change colour then? Does that why it becomes white?
It's colourless, yeah.
Because of the way it
actually turns
light.
into light and actually loses density and mass as well.
Really?
But yes.
Oh, is it something to do with anti-gravity?
Anti-grav, yeah, anti-grav. If had the powder of monatomic gold and put it in this glass, the glass would weigh less than nothing. Yeah, depending on how much you put in, of course. But that's the principle. And it's been researched, and this is a very well-known thing. Anyone out there who thinks that's crazy, go and look at monatomic gold, and then go and ask a physicist about it. And you'll have some fun.
Because I've got to say, I think that people who might have gone along with you with all the other stuff about the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve...
They drop off at that point.
They might think, that's okay, we can sleep in our beds now. The world is as it's been described. He's clearly...
a nutter.
Well, that is the word I was thinking.
That's fine.
I'm not saying that you are.
No, I'd rather...
It's my job to ask the questions.
I'd rather be the nutter as, you know... I would rather be that sort of nutter, because, as I say, that is peer-reviewed science anyway. It's a matter of fact. And all I'm suggesting, I'm saying it's an interesting point, that somebody somewhere is taking all of our gold right at the time. Actually, this stuff was discovered or rediscovered in the 50s. So ever since then, there's been this movement to gather all the gold together. Now, if you have a substance which scientists call the most exotic matter ever discovered, and it does have anti-gravity properties and many other properties, and it's officially described as the most exotic matter ever discovered. Is it a coincidence, is what I'm saying, that all of our gold is suddenly being taken away? I don't know. I don't know. But it's not necessary to even consider that, because you come back to the point of the issuance of the currency.
OK. Now, Paul in St Helens, I don't want you to answer this question yet because we've got a long show, 2 hours. Paul in St Helens is saying, just how do we stop it? So, Paul, we will get to that, hopefully, but not now. Mick in Preston says they don't need money because they print it. They want power and to control you.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
It's not the money, it's what you can do with the money by just suddenly removing it all and making everything worth less.
Yeah.
They can then acquire the real assets like
that's it.
Businesses and concessions on gold mines or whatever.
People often say, why would bankers collapse their own banks? Well, first of all, the owners of those banks haven't got a clue of what's going on. If they're some of the subsidiary banks and so on, they are merely bankers. But you create the circumstances where, as the banks do, basically, by putting up interest rates, people can't pay off their mortgages, so the bank forecloses on the property. These cycles you talked about are not natural cycles. They steal your property or the nation's property from you in a well-controlled manner.
But interest rates are very low at the moment, aren't they?
They are.
So are you saying that they're suddenly going to hike up to 15% again or whatever they were?
Having been a mortgage specialist, and I worked in building societies for 18 years, I think it was, when interest rates are low, what happens? People come along and they borrow more money. Now, what happens to interest rates?
House prices goes up because the price of houses goes up. I mean, because everyone wants them.
That's it. Things change. Interest rates at some point, because of the cycles you're talking about, which actually are man-made, up goes the interest rate. People struggle. Houses are repossessed. Interest rates drop down. It all starts over again. It's very, very boring. But what's happening is...
But if we have really bad inflation, won't everybody's mortgage be worth less? I mean, you know, they'll owe less money. Try
that one. Go to your building society and say, actually, do I owe you less now?
Well, it'll be the same number, but each pound will have less power.
Yeah, it will. But who's profiting and who's losing from it?
OK, we're going to go for another break now. Once again, if you'd like to text to your questions or comments for Mark Cocking, why not do so now? See you very soon. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Mark Cocking, who hopefully I can get his name right this time. Mark, so let's go back to some... There's been loads and loads of texts coming in. Here's Jack in Plymouth. He says the aliens have the gold in exchange for technology.
Yeah?
What do you think?
Is that right? God, hang on. This is just in case, you know. I'll put my helmet on, all right? No, they do this. They do this. No, I don't mean to sort of take the mick too much. It's...
But you had prepared it, hadn't you?
I had prepared. I had to use this. You know, that's what my sarnies were in earlier. It's one of those things. I can't answer that question. I mean, anything's possible. When you do get involved in this and you sort of pursue the research, I hate to say it to any of the people out there who are not familiar with the UFO and the conspiracy side and all that, but yes, there is definitely a tie to something, and it has something to do with aliens and so on. But my point I keep
so
making
what are you
is
then
irrelevant.
About aliens?
What am I saying?
Yeah, what are you saying about? You know, I mean, okay, I mean, this has nothing to do with banking, but you've been researching esoteric and occult knowledge for 24 years. You know, do you think that our planet has aliens visiting it, living on it, living with us?
It's so clear that if you look back in history, there's so many references to this sort of thing. It's quite plainly arguable that humanity was created by alien intervention, that we are in fact created at least partly in their image, and so on and so forth.
And well, this is Zechariah Sitchin and people like this, isn't it? And
yeah, but I mean,
Lloyd Pye. And
that's it. But then the conspiracy theorists will jump in and say, well, Zechariah Sitchin, his last book was encouraged by the Pope and all this sort of thing, that they're trying to build this mythology and rewrite history.
Well, the Catholic Church has recently declared that the existence of aliens wouldn't affect the truthfulness of the Catholic faith.
I don't mean to upset anyone by putting a tinfoil helmet on. Actually, that's to protect me against the real paranoid theorists who are out there. Yes, there's obviously some sort of, let's say, above government knowledge. And there is a lot more I could say about it, but you've had people like, well, Nick Pope, many others will talk about this. At the end of the day, the evidence stacks up to suggest quite clearly that there's an awful lot of lies being told about human history and human genesis. The whole thing is largely made up. Many of the religions are based around this lie, but it is coming down. It is coming down. So whoever is controlling stuff and whatever they are actually doing, and I have likened it to farming the human population, because one thing is provable.
Yeah,
it is
on your Facebook site.
Yeah, we are being farmed. It's a word I like to use. Our assets and the planet are being farmed by somebody up there. This goes through the elite banking families, and if one of them wants to come on and tell us who actually sits at the top of the pyramid, it may or may not be alien. But if you ask 100 people, do you believe in aliens, and try it sometime, oh, sorry, do you believe we're alone? 99 of them will say no. I mean,
it's not so extreme, really.
Yeah, but then if you suggest, well, hang on then, if these ETs do exist, and they're in advance of us, clearly by definition, are they dense enough to not have come to Earth before the human race evolved to the state it is now? Or are they going to wait until we all, you know, until today and then come tomorrow, where we could actually do something about it? They've been here all along, is what the story seems to suggest. And if you want to go and research it, you will find that every aspect of research backs that. It doesn't prove it, it backs it. And no element of research actually undermines that argument.
Well, there is some scientific evidence, isn't there? I mean, I read a book by Lloyd Pye called Everything You Know Is Wrong, where he talks about the number of chromosomes we've got, which differs from apes.
Yeah.
That we're supposed to have been descended from a common line with.
Yeah. When I worked in the financial industry, I wrote a paper once about the Human Genome Project when it was just being discussed for the insurance industry, just as a matter of interest, really. It wasn't as a guide paper or anything. And it was pointing out that, in fact, the Human Genome Project is going to undermine the entire basis of the insurance industry. Everyone I showed that to was like, Human Genome Project, what's that? Duh. Now, we've already seen the effect that that's had. But what they discovered in that project is that 2 of the chromosomes have been fused. Now,
so we've got one fewer. We've got like 2 stuck together so that perhaps, and the theory in that book I read that I was telling you about, was that meant that we could then breed with an alien species that had 1 fewer chromosome.
Yeah, or it could mean lots of other things. I mean, we couldn't actually claim to know, but the fact is those chromosomes have been fused. And the corresponding fact is the only way that we can ever imagine that being possible is through genetic engineering. And then you can study your historical documents, the Bible, all sorts of things, talk about the very creation of humankind.
So maybe there was an Adam and Eve then?
Maybe there was. Maybe they were bankers. Who knows? You know, I would love, I could sit here and spout off about what I think it is, but it is all irrelevant because you can go on forever. People get paranoid about this. You've got your New World warriors out, New World Order, anti-New World Order warriors out there who are trying to pick on people who are in the public eye speaking about this sort of thing and just causing even more confusion. Yes, you can research this. Yes, there's something going on. There's a great guy called William Cooper, who anyone who does conspiracy research of any sort will have come across. He was very clear on what he thought was going on. And this was a military man who saw lots and had an awful lot to say and was murdered for his efforts. Lots of serious people talk about ET intervention. The point I make is whether they're lizards, whether they're fluffy bunnies, it doesn't matter what they are, the control comes down to this umbilical where we are being sucked dry by the issuance of the currency as a debt. Okay, so we can snip that.
Vicky in Blythe says, how long did the leaders of the country know this was going to happen? I assume she means, you know, that the Bank of England would be privately owned or the money would be issued as debt before it did happen, and could they have stopped it happening?
Yes. I mean, I've spoken to my MP, and again, it's not about names. I went to see my MP and said, in quite simple terms, you must realise that there is a conspiracy going on here, and it's you who's paid, you the MP, who is paid to represent us, the people, and you should be asking these questions, and you should be asking Gordon Brown to stop the Bank of England issuing the currency as a debt. Now,
but wouldn't he then be putting not only his job and
of course he would
on the line, but wouldn't he also be putting a little bit more on the line? I mean, there is some real risk here.
Of course there is, but at the end of the day, that's what they're there to do. We don't have to go into the realms of ET and all this kind of thing, because, you know, and if you do, your MP will think you're crazy anyway. You don't have to go there. But, pardon me, but you can question them and say, how can you allow a private group of individuals to suck our financial system dry, our assets, everything? And my particular MP confirmed. He says, yes, I couldn't agree with you more, he said. The entire system is controlled by sharks and vagabonds and so on. And I pointed out that they're not just sharks and vagabonds, they are actually criminals, and that this is a conspiracy, and that if he, being paid to represent us, doesn't do this, then we, the people, are going to do it. And we're going to come back to you and ask you why you didn't back us. But
was your MP, and perhaps you shouldn't name him or her, but...
He's a good bloke, actually. I've got nothing to say against him. But if anyone's going to stick their neck out, why aren't these people doing it? I mean, look, we could go into their expenses claims and all sorts.
Well, they've had the rug pulled out from under them, haven't they?
Well, I wonder why that is.
Perhaps.
I wonder why that is, because right at the time where people are going to their MPs and pointing this out to them, and we are around the country, well, they're being discredited now. It won't be long before they're removed.
Okay, there's a question. I can't work out quite who this comes from, but it seems he says, or she says, it seems they want us to know now. It's all too blatant. It's as if the awakening is all part of the plan.
Well, right. Well, this is the sort of twist, the Mobius strip twist that I've referred to. If you
Mobius